Ballistic missiles target carrier. USS Abraham Lincoln targeted by 4 ballistic missiles amid escalating tensions. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has claimed that it launched 4 ballistic missiles at the US Navy aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, marking what could be one of the most significant direct confrontations between Iran and the United States in recent decades, if independently confirmed. Now let's dive deeper and explore every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
Welcome. If you are navigating the geopolitical landscape right now, you are likely feeling the friction of just an incredibly overloaded information environment.
Oh, absolutely. It is a fire hose.
Right. The moment you open a feed or check a screen, you are met with breaking high-stakes alerts, usually flashing in that aggressive red typography.
Always the red text.
Always, just demanding your immediate attention. And it is increasingly difficult to cut through that sheer volume of noise to separate what is actually being claimed in official documents from the sheer panic that tends to surround those claims.
Yeah, the panic is almost a secondary product of the news itself.
Exactly. And that is the exact reason we are here. That is what this deep dive is designed to tackle.
Our objective today is to provide you with a meticulous analytical examination of the raw information. We want to dismantle the architecture of a major geopolitical claim, so you do not have to decipher the strategic intent behind it while simultaneously trying to manage the chaos of breaking news cycle.
Because you really don't have time for that. So our mission today is focused on examining a highly critical, fast-moving claim. Detailed in a source document we have titled, The Lincoln Strike, Operation True Promise 4.
It is a heavy document.
It really is. We are going to look strictly at the architecture of the claims made in this text. We will analyze the very specific, calculated language utilized by the cited sources, and we are going to outline the massive geopolitical stakes detailed in the document, if these claims are ever actually verified.
It serves as a vital exercise in textual and strategic analysis. We are evaluating the exact rhetoric chosen by a state actor to communicate an allegedly monumental event.
Right.
And dissecting what that specific wording is intended to achieve on the global stage.
But before we move into the text itself, I want to establish a very crucial parameter for you, the listener. The source material we are dissecting today contains intensely politically and geopolitically charged claims.
Highly charged.
Involving nation-states, military forces, staggering allegations. So, neither of us is taking a side here. We are not endorsing any political stance, any military action, or any of the viewpoints expressed in the original content.
We're looking at the blueprint, not buying the house.
That is a perfect way to put it. Our role is to strictly and impartially report on and analyze the ideas and the framework contained in the provided text. We are treating this document purely as an object of strategic study.
Maintaining that analytical neutrality is really the only way to properly evaluate the mechanics of the text. It allows us to look at the anatomy of the communication rather than getting swept up in the intended emotional gravity of the claims themselves.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core of this document revolves around a single, highly specific assertion. According to the text, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, claims to have launched 4 ballistic missiles targeting a United States Navy aircraft carrier.
4 ballistic missiles.
Yes, and the text specifically identifies the target as the USS Abraham Lincoln, or CVN-72.
And the source notes that if an attack of this nature is independently confirmed, it would mark one of the most significant direct military confrontations between Iran and the United States in modern history.
It is hard to overstate that.
It really is. The text does not frame this as a border skirmish or some proxy engagement. It frames it as a direct, kinetic strike on a primary asset of American military infrastructure.
To properly contextualize a claim of that absolute magnitude, we have to look at the motive the text provides. Because they do provide one.
They do.
The document outlines a very specific, monumental rationale for this alleged strike. According to the source, the IRGC is claiming this action is a direct retaliation.
What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of the alleged catalyst they are using to justify this claim. According to the document, Tehran alleges that recent joint U.S. and Israeli military actions resulted in the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei.
Which is, framing the narrative around the assassination of the supreme leader fundamentally shifts the paradigm of the entire conflict. In the context of the Iranian state architecture, there is no higher political, religious, or military figure. The text notes that Iranian officials are using this specific, staggering allegation to frame the claimed missile attack as the opening salvo of a much broader retaliation campaign.
By establishing the loss of their highest-ranking figure as the catalyst, the IRGC is attempting to manufacture a baseline of justification for actions that would otherwise be universally categorized as an unprompted, massive escalation.
Right, it creates a rationale for their base.
Exactly. And the text details that they are labeling the targets of this new campaign as American Zionist enemy targets.
I want to pause on that. That specific phrasing, American Zionist enemy targets. That is a highly calculated linguistic merger.
It is very deliberate.
The document shows the IRGC actively linking the U.S. and Israel into a single monolithic entity in their official messaging. By doing so, their rhetoric attempts to justify striking a purely American military asset in the region by painting it as indistinguishable from Israeli military architecture in the context of this alleged assassination.
It creates a narrative of total war necessity from their perspective. The text illustrates a strategic messaging loop.
How so?
Well, they are stating that because their ultimate sovereign symbol was targeted by this combined adversary, they are now authorized and indeed obligated to target the ultimate sovereign symbols of that adversary in return.
Which brings us to the specific asset they claim to have targeted. Because the source document does not vaguely gesture at naval forces. It names the USS Abraham Lincoln.
CVN 72?
Right. The text specifically identifies it as a Nimitz-class carrier. And for you listening, we are not just talking about a vessel here. The document emphasizes its role as a massive node of power projection.
It is a Leviathan.
It functions essentially as a mobile piece of sovereign territory.
Yeah.
You have to imagine a floating city of thousands of personnel that can be positioned globally to assert dominance and control airspace.
The document details the specific capabilities that make it such a formidable target. It operates as a floating airbase, capable of continuously launching and recovering fighter jets, coordinating complex surveillance missions, and acting as the command center for an entire carrier strike group.
The text highlights that military analysts view a confirmed ballistic missile strike on a U.S. carrier as an incredibly rare and highly escalatory move.
It is almost unheard of in modern conventional terms.
It explicitly describes a U.S. aircraft carrier as one of the most heavily defended military assets in the world. Striking is not just about hitting a hole with a warhead. It is about theoretically piercing a multi-layered, highly sophisticated defensive bubble that extends for hundreds of miles in every direction.
Choosing to broadcast a claim that you have fired 4 ballistic missiles at that specific defensive network is a profound statement of intent. The source cites analysts who believe such an action, if verified, would dramatically raise regional tensions and trigger severe international consequences.
It demands a response.
It is a target selection engineered to demand the immediate, undivided attention of the global security apparatus. Consider what it means to target a symbol of global power. What stands out to you about that choice?
I think the audacity of the selection is what stands out. Claiming to target the ultimate physical manifestation of American maritime dominance is a calculated move designed to force a reaction, whether diplomatic, military, or economic.
Yes.
And that strategic calculation extends deeply into how they are choosing to communicate this to the world. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the source document provides us with the granular, specific language the IRGC is deploying, and we need to parse it carefully.
The rhetorical framework they are building is arguably just as critical to analyze as the kinetic action they are claiming.
Totally agree. The text details that this announcement was not a random post on social media or a leaked rumor. It came in the form of the 7th official communique regarding what the IRGC has designated as Operation True Promise 4.
The 7th?
Yes, and furthermore, it was distributed through Iranian state-affiliated outlets, with the document specifically highlighting the Tasnim news agency.
The involvement of the Tasnim news agency is a vital contextual clue provided by the text.
Because of the state affiliation.
Exactly. Because it is state-affiliated, we know this communique is not an impromptu statement. It is highly curated, heavily vetted, official messaging, calibrated for both domestic consumption in Iran and international projection.
It is a crafted narrative.
Yes, and furthermore, the numbering convention labeling it the 7th communique of Operation True Promise 4 is a psychological tactic in itself.
It implies a series.
Right. It implies a sustained, structured, and methodical military campaign. It creates a narrative momentum, suggesting to the audience that this is an ongoing, inevitable process rather rather than a singular, isolated event.
It manufactures a sense of operational rhythm. Let's examine the exact quotes provided in the text from this 7th communiqué. First, the IRGC declares that their military operations have entered a, quote, new phase of confrontation.
A new phase?
And the communiqué utilizes a very specific descriptive phrase. Reading directly from the text here, the powerful strikes of the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran against the weary military body of the enemy have entered a new phase.
The weary military body of the enemy. That is a fascinating deployment of psychological adjectives.
Choosing the word weary is a highly intentional rhetorical choice. They're not merely stating they attacked a military force. They are actively diagnosing the condition of that force.
Yes.
It paints a picture of an adversary that is overextended, exhausted, and fundamentally decaying.
By diagnosing the U.S. military as a weary body, the IRGC is projecting a narrative of systemic American weakness. Simultaneously, as the text points out, they are contrasting this with their own forces, which they describe as delivering powerful strikes.
A clear contrast.
It is a rhetorical transfer of energy depleting the perceived stamina of the adversary while inflating their own. The text notes this language serves as a preamble to a broader declaration that operations across land and sea will intensify.
And the escalation in the communiqué's language builds to a very stark conclusion. The document provides one final warning from the text, stating that, quote, land and sea will increasingly become the graveyard of terrorist aggressors.
The term graveyard represents a massive escalation in rhetoric.
It really does.
When we analyze that language through the lens of the source text, it explicitly signals a threatened expansion of military activity across the entire Gulf region. The document provides the vital context that U.S. naval assets have maintained a highly visible strategic presence in this exact region for decades.
Yeah.
To officially declare that operational theater a graveyard is to rhetorically threaten the total systemic destruction of that long-standing security architecture.
It is absolute maximalist language. While weary implies a slow decay or exhaustion, graveyard implies absolute finality, total eradication.
There is no nuance there.
None. The text is showing us an IRGC narrative that leaves zero room for diplomatic nuance or de-escalation in its public posture.
The psychological weight of that maximalist language is the entire point of the communiqué. The document illustrates how the IRGC is attempting to paint a picture of an inevitable, crushing victory against an opponent that is already exhausted.
It is multi-layered messaging.
It serves multiple strategic functions simultaneously. It galvanizes their domestic base by projecting absolute strength. It attempts to intimidate regional adversaries, and it forces the international community and global markets to price in the risk of a catastrophic regional war.
We have spent the first half of this deep dive unpacking the staggering claims and the, frankly, apocalyptic rhetoric outlined in the document. Now, we have to contrast that with the physical reality presented in the text. So what does this all mean?
This is the crucial pivot.
When we strip away the psychological framing of graveyards and weary bodies, what are the verified facts on the ground as documented by our source?
The single most vital piece of information in the entire document is located in the section detailing the current status of the event.
And what does it say?
The text states unequivocally, as of now, there has been no independent confirmation from U.S. defense officials regarding the claimed ballistic missile strike. Furthermore, there is zero reported damage to the USS Abraham Lincoln or any associated vessels.
That is a profound disconnect. The text sets up a scenario where an adversary claims to have launched 4 ballistic missiles at a Nimitz-class carrier, yet there is no U.S. confirmation, no distress signals, and no reported physical damage.
Nothing.
A kinetic strike of that magnitude against a target that large and that heavily monitored does not simply go unnoticed by the target itself or by independent satellite surveillance.
It is impossible to hide. The document is purposefully highlighting this massive chasm between the curated state-affiliated broadcast from the Tasnim news agency and the verifiable reality on the ground.
Right.
To help us understand this gap, the source text provides essential historical context. It explicitly notes that historically, Iran has utilized the announcement of military operations primarily as an instrument of psychological and strategic messaging.
So the text is directing us to look at a demonstrated historical pattern. Yep. It suggests that there is a strategic playbook where claiming a massive military strike, even one that may not have occurred, or certainly not to the catastrophic degree claimed, serves a political purpose. It is a way to deploy a narrative weapon when deploying a physical weapon might invite an unwinnable conventional war.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it perfectly contextualizes why the source document describes the situation as highly fluid. We are analyzing an event where the geopolitical narrative is traveling at the speed of a press release, while the actual verifiable facts remain static.
That liminal space.
Exactly. Navigating this liminal space, the void between a terrifying official claim of a carrier strike and the quiet reality of zero independent verification, is the core competency required for understanding modern global security. The text points out that global attention is currently paralyzed, focused on the Gulf, waiting to see which reality takes hold.
Because the implications of verification are world-altering. The document explicitly states that any verified damage to the carrier or any verified casualties resulting from this claimed strike would drastically alter the trajectory of U.S.-Iran relations and fundamentally reshape the entire security landscape of the Middle East.
The distinction the text draws is between a sophisticated psychological messaging campaign and a verified kinetic strike on sovereign U.S. territory.
Two very different realities.
The former is a tense, familiar geopolitical standoff. The latter is the potential trigger for a cascading regional war. The document requires us to hold both of these conflating possibilities in our minds simultaneously while the verification process plays out.
For you, the listener, this is the exact reason parsing a document like the Lincoln Strike, Operation True Promise 4, is so incredibly valuable. When you're confronted with a massive, panic-inducing headline declaring that a U.S. aircraft carrier has been attacked, you now possess the analytical framework to critically evaluate that information.
You are no longer just reacting to the red typography.
Precisely. You understand the necessity of seeking out independent verification from defense officials, rather than taking state-affiliated communiques at face value. You recognize that in modern conflict, the language of the announcement, the curated communiques, the numbered operations, the maximalist rhetoric is often the actual weapon being deployed.
The source document has essentially provided us with the complete anatomy of a geopolitical claim.
Let's trace that structure for a moment to wrap up.
Sure. First, the establishment of the alleged catalyst, in this case, the highly inflammatory claim of an assassination.
Second, the bold, specific operational claim of firing 4 missiles at the CVN-72.
Third, the rhetorical amplification through state media, declaring the sea a graveyard.
And finally, the stark reality check of zero independent confirmation.
It serves as a masterclass in reading the negative space of global conflict.
It really does. To synthesize the critical insights we have extracted from the source text today, we analyze the monumental claim by the IRGC of launching 4 ballistic missiles at the USS Abraham Lincoln. We examined the staggering motive provided in the text, centered on the alleged assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei by U.S. and Israeli forces.
We parsed the highly calculated, extreme rhetoric embedded within the 7th communique of Operation True Promise 4.
Breaking down the psychological intent behind phrases like weary military body and graveyard of terrorist aggressors, and crucially, we highlighted the document's emphasis on the absolute necessity of waiting for independent U.S. verification before accepting these geopolitical claims as physical reality.
And we must also reiterate that our analysis today was strictly an exploration of the framework and claims presented in this specific source document. We are evaluating the text to understand the mechanisms of state-level strategic messaging, not endorsing any political or military stance regarding the actors involved.
Absolutely essential reminder. Now, we always aim to leave you with a final thought to explore on your own, something that builds upon the analytical framework we have just constructed from the source material. Considering the intense rhetoric we unpack today, there is a fascinating strategic dilemma inherent in this type of messaging.
This raises an important question based on the text's historical context. If we accept the historical pattern outlined in the document, that these massive maximalist announcements are often utilized purely for psychological and strategic messaging, rather than signaling actual kinetic intent, how does a nation-state effectively walk back from officially declaring a heavily militarized region a graveyard of terrorist aggressors?
It is a massive corner to paint yourself into.
If the actual underlying strategic goal is simply to project strength to a domestic audience and manufacture political leverage, rather than to actually trigger an all-out catastrophic conventional war with a global superpower, how is de-escalation achieved after setting the rhetorical stakes at the absolute maximum? It is an incredibly dangerous tightrope. A state risks looking powerful to its own citizens, only to inadvertently force an adversary into a corner where they feel compelled to respond kinetically to the rhetoric alone.
The paradox of deterrence through extreme rhetoric. Once those words are injected into the global bloodstream via official channels, they possess their own gravity and they cannot be retracted. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope this comprehensive analysis of the source text helped cut through the noise of the news cycle, providing you with a clearer, more analytical framework for evaluating fast-moving, high-stakes geopolitical claims. Keep looking for the verification behind the breaking alerts, stay analytical, and keep questioning the architecture of what you read. We will catch you next
Okay,
time.
one question for you. If Iran's IRGC claim that it struck the USS Abraham Lincoln with 4 ballistic missiles is verified, how could this reshape US-Iran relations and potentially trigger a wider military confrontation in the Middle East? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.